Alright, what's happening, guys? Cody here with Edge Pro Sharpening Systems. I had this big plan how I was gonna go stand out in the middle of a soccer field and I was gonna narrate the video with Mount Hood in the background, but I got out there and some dogs started barking and I didn't want to have to compete with the noise from the dogs the whole time, so I decided I'd just go for a little walk. And now I'm competing for noise with airplanes that are flying over. Stand by. Alright, I think that the planes have passed, at least for the moment anyways. So today Chris from Modesto, California sent in his buck 110 to get sharpened. And I talked to Chris on the phone for quite a while, and I've never talked to anybody who was quite this excited to get sharpening. So super excited for you, Chris. I know you're just gonna totally crush it when you get out there and start sharpening. So before we get too into the sharpening process, if you guys are sharpening using an apex, then I want you to take a look at your machine and make sure that your stone arm is oriented so that it's going down the center of your machine. Next, I want you to take a look at the side of your machine and make sure that your two pivot blocks are in alignment along the top of the blocks. Now, if it's set at like some really steep or really low angle, the blocks might not be perfectly in line, but they need to be relatively close. And last, I want you to take a look at the other side of the pivot and take a look at that T-knob. That T-knob should be centered in the slot when the stone arm is down the center of the machine. That T-knob being centered in the slot is what's going to give you the maximum amount of right to left movement with the stone arm without causing any binding. And so this is just a good thing to check once in a while to make sure that everything's operating the way that it should. So next I want to walk you guys through how I set the machine up to sharpen this knife. And one of the first things I always do is I set the guide plate to the knife. Very simple process. All you got to do is just bring the guide plate forward until the edge of the knife is just barely hanging out in front of the blade table. And you want to do this because you want to make sure that your stone isn't going to be contacting the blade table while you're sharpening. So the next decision I needed to make was whether or not I was going to rest on the flat section of the blade or whether I was going to rest on the face of the blade. Now the Buck 110 actually has a decent amount of flat, not to mention a very large ricasso. The ricasso is that little flat spot right in front of the handle. So whenever I have an opportunity like this, I'll just butt the handle of the knife up against the side of the apex and use that kind of as an index point, and I'll rest on the ricasso and the flat. And by butting the handle of the knife up against the side of the machine, it helps me to reposition the blade in the same spot consistently every time I flip the knife over. So this was an easy decision for me to make. I just rested on the flat, but really you could have rested on either surface because both surfaces offered you a really solid rest. Anytime I'm sharpening a knife, as long as the guide clip isn't in the way, then I just leave the guide clip on. It's just going to give you a little bit larger fence to rest the spine of the blade against while you're sharpening, and that just makes things a little bit easier. It keeps the knife from wanting to jump over the guide plate while you're sharpening. So after that, I had to decide whether or not I was going to sharpen with the magnet activated or deactivated. I'm a big fan of the magnet. I'm using it on about 95% of the knives that I'm sharpening now, so it was a pretty easy decision to make. I felt like it provided for a more solid rest whether you were sharpening on the flat or the face, so I think it was a good option for either way you wanted to go about this. So magnet activated. So one of the last things I got to do before I start sharpening this knife is figure out what sharpening angle we're going to do this at. So I checked the existing bevel to find out that, like the manufacturer says, it actually was sharpened at 15 degrees. That's not always the case. So it was sharpened at 15 degrees on one side. I flipped the knife over, checked the other side before I started sharpening, and I found one high spot up at 18 degrees, right in the center of the knife. Very common thing to find these uneven factory grinds. The more knives you sharpen, the more you're gonna realize that it's just pretty standard. Do not be shocked when you put your brand new knife on your Edge Pro to find out that it came from the factory with a grind that was less than perfect. So in my opinion, I think that 15 degrees is a little bit low to be sharpening a knife like this anyways. It's gonna be a sharper edge, but at the same time, it's also gonna be a little bit more fragile edge. So I raised the sharpening angle up to 18 degrees and I went to town. It didn't take long before a burr developed on the first side, flipped it over, took a little bit longer on the second side, but I think I only had to go over each side once before I had a burr. Once you've laid the groundwork with one of your coarser stones, in this case I started with the 400 grit stone and raised that burr, the hard work is pretty much over. Then I just started progressing through the rest of the stones. Next I went over it with the 1000, and then I went over it with the 2300 grit matrix stone, and I finished with the 4000 grit matrix stone. And when I get to my finishing stone, I just lighten up the pressure a little bit and try to reduce or remove that burr as much as I possibly can. So anyways, Chris, I think you're gonna be really happy with the way this knife turned out. It sharpened up really nice and really quick. This is a super easy knife to sharpen on your Edge Pro. Very straightforward. But regardless of that, if you have any problems, don't hesitate to reach out to me and I'll walk you through anything you might be having problems with. And that goes for the rest of you guys too. If you're looking to step up your sharpening game, or if you have no sharpening game, then make sure you check out our sharpening gear at our website. It's edgeproinc.com. And if you're feeling a little bit intimidated by the whole process and you want to talk to somebody about any reservations you might be having, just pick up the phone, give me a call. I answer the phone most of the time. And if you guys are new to the sharpening channel and you want to stay in the loop with new products that we're going to be releasing or other sharpening tips, make sure you hit the subscribe button below so that you'll be one of the first ones to know and not one of the last ones to know. Alright guys, that about wraps it up. So thanks a lot for watching, and make sure you stay tuned and we'll be talking again very soon.